Hello, in today's video I will be making a blue 1690 court gown, starting off with the shift. So this is the shift. Now I'm using the same shift as I did in my hoop along video. However, I did alter the sleeves. So the first thing I did was I lengthened it to mid-elbow because it was short sleeves at first. And then I noticed that often sleeves from the 1690, they're often puffy and trimmed with ribbons and lace. So the way that I made my sleeves puffy is just by gather stitching a really long rectangular piece of fabric and then sewing it to the sleeve. Now for this little ruffle at the bottom, I just did the same thing, but I didn't gather stitch the bottom. As you can see here, I've just added lace on the top and bottom and this blue ribbon. And I did the same thing on the other side. So now that the shift is altered and done, we can move on to making the bodice. So this is the bodice. Now if you're wondering how I made this, it would usually be a front panel, side panel, and back panel. However, this time I was lazy, so I cut it as one large panel. And as you can see here, I fully boned it. And inside of the back, I wanted it to be laced up. However, making eyelet holes would take way too long, so I laced it up like this. I also added this other panel here because originally the gap was too wide, so I added that. And as far as the sleeves go, I just cut out a gigantic rectangular piece of fabric that would fit into like the armhole, and then I just sewed it in and made adjustments until I was happy with how it looked. So that's the bodice. So now we can move on to making the skirt. So this is the skirt that I made. Now the way that I made this is just by sewing up a gigantic tube with the circumference of 93 inches, then just adding in a drawstring waistband. So the skirt is really easy to make, but now that the skirt is done, we can move on to making the train. So this is the train that I made. Now the way that I made this is just by taking a large rectangular piece of fabric, then pleating it until it fits the waist. Now historically these trains were often pinned up and looped up, and I looped mine up. However, I didn't pin it, I just sewed it in place because it just seemed easier than just having to repetitively pin it up. But now that the train is done, we can move on to So this is the headdress that I made. Now this type of headdress is called the fontage. Now the way that I made this is just by measuring the distance from my ear around my head to my other ear. And then I cut out that curve on a sheet of cardboard. Then it's basically just a large rectangular piece of cardboard with this crescent shape. And then I did the same thing to make the back. Now I cut out a long rectangular piece to act as a binding, and then I just taped it together to make this cardboard structure. Then I just covered it inside white fabric, and then I made all of these ruffled tiered frills. I also added some lace, and I just hot glued all of that. I also added these lace lappets to it. As you can see, I've made it out of a Cheerio box. But now that the headdress is done, we can just move on to the decorations. So these are all of the decorations. So as you can see here, I've made a bunch of little green bow ties that I plan to add to the gown. And then I also have these pieces of blue ribbon for the bodice. So I would just go attach all of these decorations to the gown. Just finished attaching all of the decorations. So now that all of the decorations are attached, we can move on to the grand reveal.